Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. We always love to take a close look at listener suggestions for our deep dives, and today's topic is no exception.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So we got a great article all about infrastructure improvements in India,
Yeah.
and specifically it was focusing on smaller scale projects.
Right.
And that really got me thinking about it, kind of like acupuncture for a city.
Oh, I like that.
Just these little well-placed interventions can make a big difference.
Hmm.
So what do you think about that? I mean, is that a fair comparison?
I think that's a fantastic analogy. We often get caught up in these mega projects, these big flashy things, but sometimes it's the smaller, more targeted initiatives that really can make a huge difference in a community's quality of life.
So let's talk about some of the strengths of the smaller projects. The article really highlights the cost effectiveness.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, less initial investment.
Right.
And I imagine they can be implemented much faster.
Absolutely. And that speed, translates into immediate and tangible benefits for communities. Instead of waiting years for a mega project to be completed, residents can experience the positive impact almost right away, of a new road or renovated water system. So it's really quite powerful in that sense.
And that immediacy, I think, also fosters a sense of ownership. Like if people see something happening quickly, I think they're more likely to be invested in it in the long term.
Absolutely. I think a great example of that is, something like a community garden.
Yeah.
Residents are more likely to care for it if they were the ones who planted it.
That makes sense. It's not just a handout. It's really something that they're involved in from the beginning.
Precisely. When people see that their participation leads to direct results, they're more likely to take pride in those improvements and ensure that they last. But, we have to also kind of be realistic. Small-scale projects can't be a cure-all, right?
Right. They can't fix every problem.
Yeah.
And I imagine things like funding and resources can be a real challenge, especially in a developing country like India.
Absolutely. Even with the best intentions, securing consistent funding and resources, for types of projects, that can be really challenging. And another thing the article brought up that I thought was really interesting is maintenance. It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to fix this pothole, but what happens when the next monsoon season comes and that pothole reappears? So thinking about that long term is really important.
So we talked about some of the potential pitfalls there, but let's shift gears now and talk about the opportunities.
Yeah.
Because I think this is where it gets really interesting. So the article talks about the economic boost that even something like a new road can bring to a rural community.
Yeah.
Suddenly you have farmers who have access to markets. Maybe businesses can spring up.
Right.
And the whole local economy can start to thrive.
And it's not just about the economics. Improved infrastructure can have a ripple effect on health and education outcomes as well. Imagine a village where children had to walk miles to school on dangerous roads. Now they have a newly paved road. It's safer. They can get to school quicker. They have more time to study. So it's really quite impactful in that way.
And it kind of creates that virtuous cycle of positive change.
Exactly.
And speaking of positive change, let's not forget about the environment. Smaller projects, I would imagine, oftentimes have a smaller footprint.
Right.
And they can be designed, I would think, with more sustainable practices in mind from the get-go.
Absolutely. And the article brought up this idea of green infrastructure, things like rooftop gardens or rainwater harvesting systems, solar-powered community centers. All these things are fantastic examples of how small-scale projects can contribute to a more sustainable future.
Yeah, that's exciting stuff. Yeah. Now, of course, we always have to kind of look at the flip side of things.
Yeah.
So what about some of the threats? The article mentioned things like political instability and corruption, which unfortunately are a reality in many parts of the world.
Sadly, yes. And those factors can really derail even the most well-intentioned projects. Imagine a community working hard to build a new water system only to have the funds siphoned off because of corruption, or a project that gets stalled because of political infighting. It's heartbreaking.
And we can't forget about natural disasters.
Right.
Especially in a country like India with such diverse geography.
Yeah.
A newly built bridge could be washed away in a flood, or an earthquake could damage a recently renovated school.
Right. That's a very sobering thought. And it really does highlight the need for infrastructure that is not only well built, but also resilient in the face of these kinds of challenges. And then you also have to think about what happens in times of economic downturn. When budgets are tight, funding for these projects can dry up, and it makes it difficult to maintain that momentum.
Yeah, so even with all these potential threats, are there examples of small-scale projects in India that have actually been successful?
Absolutely. The article highlighted 3 really interesting initiatives that I think are worth discussing. One is the rural road development through what's called the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, or PMGSY.
Right.
There's the water supply through the Jal Jeevan Mission and sanitation through the Swachh Bharat Mission.
Wow, those are some names to remember.
They are a mouthful.
So can you kind of break those down for us a little bit? What's unique about each initiative?
Well, I think what's fascinating about all three of them is that they really emphasize community participation.
Yeah.
These aren't top-down solutions imposed on people. They're really designed to empower communities to be actively involved in shaping their own development.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, for example, the PMGSY, it's not just about laying down asphalt,
It's more than just roads.
Right. It's about connecting villages that were previously isolated, opening up opportunities for education, for healthcare, and for economic growth.
So it's really about creating those connections that then lead to all these other benefits.
Exactly.
I like that. So what about the Jal Jeevan Mission?
So the Jal Jeevan Mission focuses on bringing piped drinking water to every rural household. And it's literally saving lives. I was reading a story about a village where before the Jal Jeevan Mission, women and children had to walk for miles each day just to fetch water. Now they have access to clean water right in their homes.
Wow, so just that one change frees up so much time and energy for other things.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
And it's amazing how such a seemingly simple change, can have such a profound impact on people's lives.
And what about the third one, the Swachh Bharat Mission?
Yeah, so the Swachh Bharat Mission, which translates to the Clean India Mission, is all about sanitation and hygiene. And it's been incredibly successful in promoting the construction of toilets, encouraging behavioral changes to reduce open defecation, which has been a major public health issue in India.
Yeah, I remember reading about that, so it sounds like they're making some real progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
So these are just a few examples from India, but I'm curious, are there similar success stories in other parts of the world?
Oh, absolutely. These challenges are certainly not unique to India, and there are some really inspiring examples of small-scale infrastructure projects having a big impact all over the globe.
Like what? Give me some examples, I'm curious.
Well, have you ever heard of community-led total sanitation, or it's often called CLTS?
I'm not familiar with that one.
So this is a really revolutionary approach to sanitation that uses community-driven behavior change to improve sanitation. It originated in Bangladesh and has actually spread to countries all over the world, including India.
So how does that work?
Well, imagine a village where open defecation is the norm.
Right. Yeah.
So CLTS facilitators, they'll work with the community to help them understand the health risks and social stigma that are associated with this practice. But it's not about lecturing people.
Oh, so it's more about empowering them to find their own solutions.
Exactly. They use a variety of participatory techniques to trigger a sense of disgust and a desire for change within the community itself.
Interesting.
And it's achieved incredible results in reducing open defecation without relying on these massive subsidies or external funding.
So it's really tapping into the community's own resources and motivation.
Exactly.
I love that.
What?
What other examples come to mind?
Well, another inspiring example comes from Nepal, where they have these small hydropower projects that have been lighting up remote villages.
Oh, cool.
And these projects are often community-owned and operated, and they're bringing electricity to areas that were previously off the grid.
Yeah, they're bringing the light both literally and figuratively to these communities.
Exactly. And it's not just about flipping a switch. Electricity means that children can study at night, businesses can thrive, and communities can connect with the wider world.
Yeah, that's huge.
And then you also have the power of urban green spaces.
Yeah.
Cities like Singapore and Copenhagen have shown that even small pockets of nature can make a huge difference in the quality of urban life.
Yeah, I love that. So it's not just about rural areas. Even in these dense urban environments, those small-scale interventions can make a big impact.
Absolutely. Think about parks, community gardens, rooftop gardens, even just street trees. They can provide a respite from the concrete jungle, they can improve air quality, and they can really foster a sense of community.
So I'm sensing a pattern here. Whether it's rural electrification sanitation or urban green spaces, it seems like community involvement is really the key ingredient.
You're absolutely right. All these global examples, they really highlight the importance of engaging communities in the design, the implementation, and the maintenance of these projects. And what's fascinating is how these concepts can be adapted and implemented in different contexts all over the world, including India.
So it's about taking inspiration from what's working elsewhere and tailoring it to fit the specific needs of that community.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about being creative, being adaptable, and most importantly, listening to the people you're trying to serve.
That makes so much sense. It's not about imposing solutions from the outside. It's about empowering those communities to shape their own future. So we've talked about some really inspiring examples of what's possible, but what about the challenges? What are some of the obstacles that can prevent these projects from being successful?
That's a great question and a crucial one to consider. While these success stories are inspiring, we also need to be realistic about the hurdles that need to be overcome. So let's dive into some of those challenges in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds good. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back.
One of the big challenges I think we need to think about is how do we make sure that these projects are truly sustainable in the long run?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we've seen how successful these small-scale projects can be, but how do we make sure that they're not just temporary fixes? How do we ensure that, the benefits continue to flow even after that initial enthusiasm, maybe the funding has faded?
Well, one really crucial aspect of that is building local capacity. It's not enough to just sort of parachute in and build a well or install some solar panels. You need to make sure that the community has the skills and the knowledge to maintain those systems over long term.
So it's about empowering them to take ownership, not just of the project itself, but of its continued success.
Exactly. And that often means investing in training programs, providing technical support, and fostering a sense of responsibility within the community. Think back to the example of CLTS. One of the reasons why it's been so successful is because it really focuses on changing behaviors and attitudes, not just building toilets.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah.
It's about creating a shift in those social norms so that sanitation becomes a priority for the entire community.
Right. And that kind of shift, it takes time, it takes effort, but it's essential for ensuring that these improvements become embedded in the fabric of daily life. And then there's another challenge that we need to address, which is access to resources. Even with the best intentions, communities often struggle to secure the funding, the materials, the expertise they need to implement and maintain these projects.
That makes sense. I
Mm.
imagine it can be especially tough in, those remote or marginalized communities that are often overlooked by traditional funding sources.
Absolutely. And this is where innovative financing models come in.
Right.
Things like microfinance institutions, for example, are playing an increasingly important role in providing small loans to communities for these types of projects.
I'm interesting.
And there are also some really interesting examples of crowdfunding platforms that are specifically designed to support community-led development initiatives.
That's really cool. So it's about finding those creative ways to connect communities with the resources they need. What about technology? I mean, we've seen how technology is transforming so many aspects of life. Can it also play a role in enhancing the impact of small-scale infrastructure?
Absolutely. Technology can be an absolute game changer in this field. For instance, think about the potential of mobile technology to connect rural communities with information and services.
Yeah.
Farmers can access real-time market prices, students can connect with online educational resources, patients can consult with doctors remotely.
Wow, so technology can really help bridge that gap between urban and rural areas.
Absolutely. What about the role of technology in monitoring and maintaining infrastructure?
Oh, that's a great point.
Imagine sensors embedded in roads that can detect early signs of damage,
Yeah.
allowing for timely repairs before they become major problems, or smart water meters that can help identify leaks and reduce waste.
Wow.
Technology can make infrastructure more efficient, more resilient, and more responsive to the needs of communities.
It's like giving infrastructure a voice and a brain.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the power of data. By collecting and analyzing data on infrastructure, usage, traffic patterns, water consumption, all these other key metrics, we can identify areas for improvement, we can optimize resource allocation, and we can ensure that projects are truly meeting community needs.
So it's about moving beyond guesswork and intuition to a more data-driven approach.
Precisely. And that can lead to more effective, more equitable, and more sustainable outcomes.
But of course, with any new technology, there are potential downsides as well.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that we need to be aware of when it comes to incorporating technology into these projects?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is ensuring equitable access to technology. We need to make sure that these tools and resources are available to everyone, not just those who are already connected and tech savvy.
Right. So we need to bridge that digital divide and make sure that everyone has the opportunity to benefit.
Absolutely. And another challenge is data privacy and security.
Okay, good point.
As we collect more and more data about infrastructure usage, about community needs, we need to be very careful about how that data is stored, how it's shared, how it's used. We need to protect people's privacy and ensure that their data is not being misused.
Yeah, it's not just about technology for technology's sake. It's about using technology responsibly and ethically to empower communities.
Exactly. And that brings us back to something that we've been touching on throughout this deep dive, which is the importance of community engagement.
Mm.
Technology can be a powerful tool, but it's only as effective as the people who are using it.
So it's not about technology replacing human connection and collaboration.
Exactly. In fact, I would argue that technology can actually enhance community engagement by providing new platforms for communication, for collaboration, for collective action.
That's a fascinating thought. How do you see that working in practice?
Sure, imagine a community that's working on a project to improve their local water supply.
Okay.
They could use a mobile app to share information about the project, to collect feedback from residents, to coordinate volunteer efforts.
So it's like a digital town square where everyone can come together.
Exactly. And that kind of transparency and participation, it can help build trust, it can foster a sense of ownership, and it can ensure that the project truly reflects the needs of the community.
And when people feel like they're part of the solution, they're more likely to be invested in its success.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another really crucial aspect of community engagement, which is capacity building.
Uh-huh.
It's not enough to just involve people in the decision-making process. We also need to equip them with the skills and the knowledge they need to be effective partners in these projects.
So it's about investing in education, training, mentorship to help those community members really develop the skills they need to take ownership.
Exactly. And that can be anything from, teaching people how to use new technologies to providing training on project management, on financial literacy, on conflict resolution.
Wow. So it's really a holistic approach. It's not just about building infrastructure. It's about building communities.
You've hit the nail on the head. Ultimately, the success of these projects depends on the strength and the resilience of the communities that they serve.
And that's something that we often overlook, don't we? We get so focused on the technical aspects of infrastructure that we forget about that human dimension.
It's easy to do, especially when you're dealing with, these complex engineering challenges or tight deadlines. But we need to remember that infrastructure is ultimately about people.
Yeah.
It's about connecting people, empowering people, and improving people's lives.
And that's a really powerful reminder. It brings us back to the heart of why we're doing this deep dive in the first place. It's not just about bricks and mortar. It's about building a better future for everyone.
Absolutely. And speaking of building a better future, I think it's time that we shifted our focus to some real-world examples of people and organizations who are doing just that.
Okay, sounds good. Let's hear about those inspiring stories. So we've talked about the theory, we've talked about some of the challenges of small-scale infrastructure, but now I'm really excited to hear about those real-world examples that you mentioned.
Yeah.
What are some of the organizations that are actually making this happen out there on the ground?
Well, one organization that I think really stands out is the CELCO Foundation.
Okay.
They're based in India, and they're doing some incredible work in the field of rural electrification. And I think what's really impressive about CELCO is that they're not just focused on the technology itself.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, they really recognize that simply providing solar panels isn't enough. They take a much more holistic approach that considers the social, the economic, the cultural context of each community.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. They work very closely with communities to understand their specific needs, their aspirations, and then they design customized solutions that are both technically sound and culturally appropriate.
Can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Sure, imagine a village that's struggling with unreliable electricity. They might be relying on kerosene lamps for lighting, which is not only expensive, but also harmful to their health.
Right.
So CELCO might come in and install solar-powered lighting systems in homes in community centers.
Okay, that makes sense. But how is that different from what other organizations are doing?
Well, I think what sets CELCO apart is that they don't just stop at providing the technology. They also focus on capacity building and entrepreneurship development.
Oh, interesting.
So they might train local people to install and maintain those solar systems, which creates new job opportunities within the community.
This is about empowering people to become self-sufficient.
Exactly.
I like that.
And they've also been very successful in integrating solar power into other aspects of rural life. They've helped women set up solar power tailoring units, they've supported farmers with solar irrigation systems, and they've even created solar-powered computer labs in schools.
Wow. So it's like this ripple effect of positive change spreading throughout the community.
Exactly. And Celco is just one example. There are so many other inspiring organizations and individuals across India who are finding these really innovative ways to improve people's lives through small-scale infrastructure.
I'd love to hear another example.
Okay, well, have you ever heard of Arunachalam Muruganathan?
Oh, yeah.
He's often called the Pad Man.
The pad man, right? I remember reading about him. He invented that low-cost machine for making sanitary pads, right?
That's right. And his story is really incredible. He was driven by this deep desire to help women in his community who were struggling to afford sanitary pads.
Yeah.
And he spent years experimenting, tinkering in his backyard until he finally developed this machine that could produce, these affordable, high-quality pads.
And his invention has had a huge impact, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It's not only made sanitary pads more accessible and affordable, but it's also empowered women economically by creating these opportunities for them to manufacture and sell the pads within their own communities.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example of how that grassroots innovation can really transform lives.
Yeah.
And it highlights something we've been talking about throughout this whole deep dive, which is the importance of listening to the needs of the community and finding solutions that are tailored to their specific context.
Exactly. And Murugantham's story also reminds us that innovation doesn't always have to come from these big companies or universities. It can come from anyone you know.
Yeah.
Anyone who's willing to see a problem and dedicate themselves to finding a solution.
It's really empowering.
It is. And, it doesn't have to be something as groundbreaking as inventing a new machine. It could be as simple as, organizing a neighborhood cleanup, planting a tree, advocating for safer streets for pedestrians and cyclists.
Yeah, or even just being more mindful of our own consumption habits, making more sustainable choices in our everyday lives.
Exactly. Every little bit counts. And I think the key takeaway here is that it's not about waiting for someone else to fix the problem. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a better future.
I love that. It's about taking ownership and really empowering ourselves to be the change that we want to see in the world.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation.
It has.
Really eye-opening, and I think it's given us a lot to think about. So to our listeners out there, I encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, keep questioning, keep making those small changes that add up to a more equitable, a more sustainable, a more joyful world.
Could have said it better myself.
Well, this has been another great deep dive. We'll see you next time.